Hey folks, I have read your practicum logs yesterday, and then I read your reflective exercise 2 today and have given you feedback. I want to talk just a moment about your practicum logs. It is so important that you go into Typhon and you read the feedback that has been provided to you. As you move through your practicum courses, the idea is that this becomes a well-oiled machine, that you really understand the importance of identifying goals that you're going to tackle before you go into your practicum setting, that you're goal directed. That's the idea of developing those goals and objectives in 623, is that they would guide each of your practicum experiences. So you should always have specific goals in mind when you enter your practicum setting. You should not be going in and winging it and kind of seeing what comes. The result of winging it without a good plan is that you'll get to 626 and have to reflect on all of your goals and objectives and realize that you've not accomplished them. And that's an expectation prior to your graduation, is that you've actually accomplished these goals and objectives. So the log is the tool you use to document that accomplishment. So each log should have specific goals and objectives that you're working on for that day in practicum. Your supportive narrative section is where you're going to give the logistics of what you did. If you're in a practicum setting for 2 hours, the length and level of detail that's in that box is very different than if you were in the practicum setting for 8 to 10 hours. So the length is going to vary depending on how long you're going to be in the setting. The idea is that you give a moderately detailed accounting of how your time was spent. It's not enough to talk about a meeting that occurred during that practicum setting or an encounter. You don't have to do an hour by hour accounting, but there should be a pretty good idea of what 8 hours looked like in the supportive narrative section. 2 other things are contained in that supportive narrative section. One of those is self-reflection. I want you to think about those experiences that you just delineated in the logistics of your practicum setting, and then I want you to share your personal insights, your aha moments, your wow, I hadn't thought about that, the pearls of wisdom, the things you take away from that experience. And this is a sentence or two that just says, I found this interesting, or I was really surprised when this happened, or boy, I would never do that. It's your way of thinking about your experience. It's what we call metacognition. It's just the part of your learning that helps you reflect on what you've experienced and give it meaning for your own practice. So that's the second thing. The third thing is the prior learning experiences. This is the piece of information that shares what you already knew from your MSN journey, or maybe through research that you've read or data that you've done an analysis on that applies to this setting. It gives you support for understanding the context of that experience. So let's say you were in your practicum setting and you went to a meeting and the meeting was discussing strategic management. Well, in Nursing 524, you did a strategic management project on that and really had to think about, how do you manage process change strategically? Well, in that prior learning section, you could talk about what you learned in 524 and how that helped you understand what was going on during that meeting. Again, you're talking about a couple of sentences that just says, I knew this because I learned this in my master's course, or I read a really good article, or perhaps you read a leadership book. So it helped you understand what was going on in that experience. So that's the supportive narrative section. Your application section is kind of the rubber hitting the road in how it applies to the ANA scope and standards. So when you are done with your master's degree, you should accomplish and be very, very comfortable with this book. This is make sure I've got the right one. Yep, it's the scope and standards. This is what it means. This is what it looks like when you have a graduate degree in nursing administration. So your application section is all about what you did in practicum and how it relates to specific scopes and standards. So you're going to talk about an ANA scope and standard. Normally I'd like to see 2 or 3 that relate to what you experienced in your practicum, and you're going to say, this is the scope and standard, and this is what I did. Just briefly reiterate, I saw this, or I experienced this, and this is what this looks like in real practice. This is how I think this comes together. It's not enough to simply say, this is the standard and this is what I did. You've got to be able to give the so what. You've got to be able to say, and this is how it all pieces together. Again, you're talking about a couple of sentences, not paragraphs and paragraphs. So don't feel daunted by this, but be thorough. Each log needs to be thorough, and it needs to reflect the time that was there. One thing that may help you is putting short headings in these sections that just remind you, hey, I've got to add my reflections, I've got to do prior learning, and in the bottom I got to remember to add the scopes and standards. Use some way of organizing your writing for your own purposes as well as guiding your reader. It's not a requirement. We're not always looking for it. I've just found that with things that have lots of little parts, sometimes it's good for me to tag things with little headers or guidelines for me. The other thing I want to mention is that at no time, sorry, I'm putting my books back, otherwise I'll have a messy desk. At no time should you ever be in practicum setting without the supervision of your preceptor. And it is the preceptor that has been approved by Liberty University School of Nursing. You cannot be handed off to another person for a day so you can go have an experience. That person may or may not meet the criteria that we've set forth in our approved preceptors. So it is so important that you are using your preceptor as a resource, that you're being properly supervised, mentored, and supported by that preceptor, and that the writing that you're sharing in your log has some relevance to the value of that preceptorship. You should not be in your practicum setting, again, winging it and figuring things out for yourself. Your preceptor should be guiding your learning, mentoring, and supporting you. If you're struggling in that relationship, or you feel like maybe you're not getting what you need from that agreement, I want you to first contact that person and have that conversation. And then if you're not seeing some improvement, I want you to touch base with me. Ultimately, in the academic setting, you may be with the preceptor, but you're still my peep. So you've got to let me know how things are going and how I can help you if that relationship isn't meeting your needs. So just know that. Always one-to-one. That's an MSN policy. That's not a me thing. So just know that that's the expectation. Okay, from an APA standpoint, your papers were great. One of the assignments I love to read. I feel like this assignment gets a little unwieldy because there's so much passion when we talk about conflict. So sometimes you guys get to writing and you wander a little bit. It's great for me to read because I learn all sorts of things that are going on in hospitals, but be sure that when you're writing, that when you're done, you look at the rubric that's posted with the assignment and you read your writing, proof it, and you check off the things that are in the rubric. Things when you get excited about or you get engaged in the paper, sometimes if you forget to go back to the rubric, you can inadvertently miss a step and not realize that you've missed it. So always, when you're proofreading, literally take out the rubric or open it up and just check it off and say, okay, I've done everything before you click submit. I'm looking to see my other notes. Nope, I think that's it. 2 books. Which one was first? The Carrie Patterson, Joseph Greene, and Ron McMillan and Al Switzler wrote The Crucial Conversations. If you have not read this book, I will highly encourage you to read this maybe after you graduate. I know you're busy now. I'd rather you read your textbooks. But this book, this is a good one. If conflict just really makes you stressed, if every time you have to go have a hard conversation, you get anxious and you feel overwhelmed, or you just try to avoid conflict, conflict is healthy, folks. Healthy, productive conversations have to be had. And how we handle our own internal response to that is as important as how we handle the conversation with the other person. So Crucial Conversations is a great book. It's really kind of written like a toolkit, easy to read, lots of exemplars. I always felt like I was pretty good at Crucial Conversations. I can say hard things. What I struggle with is their follow-up book, which is Crucial Confrontations. Normally, if I'm having a confrontation, it's because I'm mad about something. And if I'm mad about something, I am not likely to be my best self. This book, Crucial Confrontations, follows right after Crucial Conversations, does a wonderful job of really giving some great practical tips and how to handle not just difficult conversations, but actual confrontation when you have to have really hard conversations that are likely to be emotional and exercised. So great books, just would encourage you to read. What we know is our best book, our best guidance at how we handle difficult conversations and confrontation is our Bible. One of your classmates did a great job kind of wrapping up the ideas of how we manage that our emotional response to the difficult conversations. Jean, which is spelled Jean, but I'm pretty sure I'm saying it correctly as Jean, which is sort of French. So please email me and tell me if I pronounced that correctly, because I've been practicing it for a little while, making sure I've got it. So, Jean wrote in her paper, Porter, O'Grady, and Malik noted good leaders recognize conflict and crisis are unavoidable and must not be ignored. Leaders must create healthy, transparent work environments where teams feel safe engaging in conflict and crisis management because they've been established as normative processes. Because change in crisis creates fear and anxiety, Christian nurse leaders understand, as Philippians chapter 4:6 teaches, it is through prayer and thanksgiving they should let their requests for peace and resolution to conflict and crisis be made known to God. He will remove the fear and anxiety and make provisions for the crisis and conflict to be resolved. A friend of mine calls this being prayed up. So when you're having to deal with the fear and the anxiety of having tough conversations and engaging in conflict, however productive or healthy it may be, it still can make us nervous. And Jean is absolutely on point in reminding us that our peace comes from God. And when we have to do that, when we pray up our souls and our hearts before we have those conversations, that we can be washed in His peace and His grace before we go in to engage in something that could feel pretty unpleasant. So I really appreciate her insights with that. Okay, switch gears real quick for next week. Your part 2 of part 1 is due. So the idea with part 2 is that you give a brief overview of the nuts and bolts of what your current problem is and how you're currently handling it. And then you spend the rest of your presentation providing a couple of innovative solutions that are not currently in practice. So whatever you're doing cannot be used as the solution. The idea is to get you into the literature. Go in and look at your quality issue and see what's new, what's innovative. What are people doing that you didn't know they were doing? That's the idea behind this assignment, is to identify a real quality issue and to create some ideas on implementing innovative solutions, and then talking about the risk and reward of using any of those solutions. The slide is 10 to 12 minutes, so I'm going to encourage you to be practiced when you do that. Before you go in and go through all the trouble of doing your voiceover PowerPoints, use a stopwatch and just read your notes or go through it a few times and time yourself and edit and critique before you hit video. I find that if I get nervous or I start getting excited about something, I wander. And then I think I've got 10 minutes and I wind up with 20. And that is evidence because these videos are not supposed to be that long, but then I get to talking and then I get excited and then I forget how long they are. So I am not the best example of being concise. You're being graded on concise. 10 to 12 minutes. So practice it before you video it. Remember, do not load your voiceover PowerPoints as voiceover PowerPoints. They need to be converted in to a YouTube URL and then posted as a link. And all you have to do is just put that in the comment section, and I'll find it when you submit your assignment. Make sure that you put your presentation in the mode that allows others to view it, that if you set it to private, I can't view it. So you've got to make sure that you make it unlisted. I think that is all of my ideas. One thing to remember, you've already done a PowerPoint. You've already been given feedback on it. Use that feedback to make this PowerPoint successful, okay? That was a trial run in reflective exercise number 1. Go back and look. What did you do well? What did you need to brush up? And apply that feedback to this PowerPoint to fully support your success. I think that is all of my notes. Let me know how you are. Let me know if there's anything that I can do for you. We are over the halfway point, so it has been my experience that this time, as soon as the leaves start blooming and the pollen comes out, so does baseball practice start and all of our spring sports start, and everybody wants to be outside. Life just gets busy this time of year. So if you are in that bubble of life getting busy, please take care of yourself. Use your time, your precious time, as carefully as you can. Let me know if you're struggling with anything. You're not expected to figure this stuff out without support and guidance. Use the Ask the Professor link for the logistics of the who, what, when, where, how kinds of questions. Email me directly with personal stuff, and I'll walk you through it. I hope you guys are well. I'm in Roanoke and it's raining, so you can see the puppies behind me. They are not pleased. So day 2 of rain, we're going to have to do more walking in the rain, which doesn't make anybody happy. I hope wherever you are, you're dry. Y'all take care.